September 23, 1944. Early morning fog clung to the hedgerows near Arracourt, France. Oberfeldwebel Klaus Hartmann pressed his eye against the Panther's periscope, scanning the mist-shrouded terrain ahead. For 6 weeks since Normandy, he had grown accustomed to a certain rhythm of combat. American Sherman tanks would appear. His crew would engage from beyond 1,500 meters. The Shermans would withdraw or burn. The mathematics were simple, reassuring, inevitable. What Hartmann didn't know was that 300 meters to his front, concealed in a sunken farm road, sat a Sherman tank whose ammunition rack contained something that would rewrite those comfortable equations. 6 rounds of M93 high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition. 6 tungsten-carbide tipped projectiles that represented 18 months of American metallurgical research, strategic material allocation, and industrial problem-solving, compressed into shells no larger than a wine bottle. In approximately 4 minutes, one of those rounds would strike his Panther's gun mantlet at a velocity exceeding 1,000 meters per second. The tungsten core would punch through 100 millimeters of cast steel armor that German engineers had confidently declared impervious to American tank guns at combat ranges. The psychological shockwave from that impact would ripple through the Panzerwaffe faster than the physical shockwave propagated through Hartmann's tank. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of how American forces solved the Panther problem begins not in the combat zones of France, but in the sterile testing facilities of Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, where in early 1944, ballistics engineers confronted a crisis that threatened to undermine the entire American armored doctrine. The crisis had a name, a designation, and increasingly detailed intelligence reports. Panzerkampfwagen, 5 Panther. German intelligence had dramatically underestimated American technical analysis capabilities. Throughout 1943, as Panthers rolled off production lines at factories across Germany, American intelligence officers were compiling detailed assessments of the new tank's capabilities. Spies in occupied Europe provided measurements. Aerial reconnaissance photographed Panthers being transported by rail. Most valuable of all, British forces in Italy captured an intact Panther in March 1944. The tank was immediately shipped to Aberdeen Proving Ground. American engineers spent 3 weeks conducting exhaustive tests. They measured armor thickness at multiple points. They calculated slope angles. They fired every type of American anti-tank ammunition available against captured armor plates. The results were sobering and mathematically precise. The Panther's glacis plate measured 80 millimeters thick, sloped at 55 degrees from vertical. This created an effective thickness of approximately 140 millimeters against projectiles striking from the front. The M4 Sherman's standard 75mm M3 gun, firing M72 armor-piercing shot, could penetrate only 91mm at 500 meters. Even at point-blank range, the sloped glacis defeated American shells through deflection. The gun mantlet presented a different problem. Cast from a single piece of steel, the mantlet's curved surface measured between 100 and 120 millimeters thick, depending on the Panther variant. The curve created unpredictable deflection angles. Shells that might theoretically penetrate flat armor of similar thickness frequently ricocheted off the mantlet's rounded surface. American ordnance officers recognized they faced not merely a tactical problem, but a fundamental challenge in physics and metallurgy. German armor had reached a threshold where conventional armor-piercing projectiles, regardless of velocity or striking energy, could not reliably achieve penetration. The solution would require rethinking the basic principles of armor-piercing ammunition design. The concept of sub-caliber ammunition was not new. Both American and German engineers understood that concentrating striking energy into a smaller, denser penetrator could improve armor penetration. The challenge lay in materials, science, and manufacturing. Creating a penetrator substantially harder than armor plate required materials like tungsten-carbide. Manufacturing such projectiles at scale required industrial processes that didn't exist in 1943. American metallurgists at the Watertown Arsenal in Massachusetts had been experimenting with tungsten-carbide penetrators since 1942. The theoretical advantages were compelling. Tungsten carbide possessed a density of 15.6 grams per cubic centimeter, nearly double that of steel. It maintained structural integrity at temperatures that would melt conventional steel cores. Most critically, its extreme hardness allowed it to penetrate armor through a combination of kinetic energy and material properties that conventional physics barely explained. The first experimental rounds, designated T4, emerged from testing in July 1944. The projectile design was elegant in concept, fiendishly difficult in execution. A tungsten carbide core, machined to precise tolerances, sat within a lightweight aluminum carrier body. This body, called a sabot, filled the gun barrel during firing, transferring propellant energy to the dense core. Upon leaving the barrel, wind resistance stripped away the aluminum carrier, leaving only the dense tungsten core to continue toward the target. The velocity increase was dramatic. Standard M92 armor-piercing rounds left the 76mm gun at 792 meters per second. The M93 HVAP round achieved 1,036 meters per second, a 244 meter per second increase. This translated directly into penetrating power through the physics of kinetic energy. At 1,000 yards, approximately 914 meters, the HVAP round could penetrate 160 millimeters of armor at 10 degrees obliquity. Against the Panthers gun mantlet, this meant reliable penetration at ranges up to 1,000 meters instead of the suicidal close-quarters distances required with standard ammunition. For American tank crews who had learned to fear the Panther's superior range and armor, this represented a genuine tactical revolution, though one that would arrive too slowly and in quantities too limited to fundamentally alter the numerical calculus of armored warfare. The industrial challenge of producing HVAP ammunition at scale exposed fundamental differences between American and German approaches to weapons development. Germany had pioneered sub-caliber ammunition with the Panzer Granit 40, which used tungsten cores to improve penetration. But German production remained limited by tungsten scarcity and competing industrial demands. By 1944, German factories hoarded tungsten for machine tools needed in aircraft engine production, leaving little for ammunition. American planners approached the tungsten problem differently. They recognized that tungsten was strategically critical and acted accordingly. Before the war, China had supplied approximately 36% of global tungsten production. American diplomats negotiated agreements, ensuring continued Chinese tungsten exports despite Japanese occupation of coastal regions. Domestic tungsten mining operations in Colorado, Nevada, and California received priority development. The United States Geological Survey conducted intensive exploration programs identifying new tungsten deposits that could be rapidly developed. By 1944, American tungsten supply, while constrained, exceeded German availability by a factor of 5. This allowed American ordnance planners to allocate tungsten to ammunition production at scales German planners could only envy. Even with adequate tungsten supplies, manufacturing HVAP rounds at scale required solving complex metallurgical and production challenges. Each tungsten carbide core required precision machining, Tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch determined whether the core would fly true or tumble in flight. The aluminum sabot required careful design to separate cleanly without destabilizing the core. Propellant charges needed precise formulation to achieve maximum velocity without exceeding safe barrel pressures. American industry solved these problems through the same mass production techniques that had transformed automobile manufacturing. Production lines at multiple facilities used specialized machinery to machine tungsten cores with consistent tolerances. Quality control. Processes tested sample rounds from each production batch. By August 1944, monthly production reached 1,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP. September yielded another 1,000 rounds. Not until November did monthly production reach 5,000 rounds, ramping to 7,000 per month by January 1945. These numbers, while representing significant industrial achievement, remained woefully inadequate for actual tactical needs. By February 1945, the average 76mm Sherman in Europe had received a total of 5 HVAP rounds. Just 5 rounds to face an enemy deploying Panthers as standard equipment in Panzer divisions. A Sherman company with 17 tanks would possess 85 HVAP rounds total, while potentially facing German units fielding 30 or more Panthers. The scarcity of HVAP ammunition created tactical and psychological tensions within American armored units. Tank commanders, who received HVAP rounds, understood they possessed potentially war-winning ammunition, but in quantities so limited that every shot had to count. Training on proper HVAP employment was minimal. The ammunition arrived at frontline units faster than doctrine could be developed or training materials distributed. Crews learned effective ranges, optimal target points, and tactical employment through experience that was often fatal for those who learned too slowly. The first HVAP rounds reached the European theatre in August 1944, arriving at a time when American armored forces were struggling with tactical challenges that transcended ammunition types. The Normandy hedgerow country had forced American armor into close-quarters combat, where German advantages in gunpowder and armor protection proved devastating. German doctrine emphasized defensive tactics that maximized these advantages. Panther crews learned to occupy hull-down positions, exposing only the heavily armored turret while keeping the more vulnerable hull hidden behind terrain. They waited in prepared positions, allowing American Sherman columns to approach before opening fire from ranges where return fire was ineffective. The psychological impact on American tank crews was severe and well documented in after-action reports. Crews developed what military psychologists termed Panther fever, an acute awareness of vulnerability that affected tactical decision-making. Sherman commanders who spotted Panthers often chose to call for artillery or air support rather than engage directly, ceding tactical initiative to an enemy who could theoretically be defeated with proper ammunition and tactics, if only that ammunition existed in adequate quantities. The deployment of 76mm Shermans themselves had been a bureaucratic saga that nearly proved catastrophic. The first M4 A176 Shermans rolled off production lines in January 1944. By April, 130 tanks had reached Britain in preparation for the Normandy invasion. Yet, despite their availability, American commanders refused to deploy these improved tanks on D-Day. The reasons reveal institutional resistance to change that would cost lives. Crews lacked adequate training time on the new weapon system. Logistical planners worried about maintaining 2 different ammunition types, complicating supply chains. Most critically, senior commanders believed the 75mm gun would prove adequate for expected opposition. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong. By early July 1944, field reports from Normandy painted a grim picture that could no longer be ignored. On July 2nd, complaints about the 75mm gun's ineffectiveness against German armor reached General Dwight Eisenhower. His response, documented by multiple witnesses, captured command-level frustration with a directness that shocked staff officers. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out? Why, I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war." The full exchange, as recorded in official histories, included stronger language, expressing anger that Ordnance had assured him the 76mm would handle anything Germans fielded. A board convened on July 12 determined officially what tank crews already knew from bitter experience. Standard American weapons could not defeat Panthers frontally. General Omar Bradley immediately ordered 76mm Shermans rushed from Britain to the front. On July 25, during Operation Cobra, 102 M4A, 176 tanks made their combat debut. The initial engagement reports were sobering. While the 76mm represented an improvement over the 75mm, it still struggled against Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. Sherman crews quickly learned they needed to maneuver for flank shots or target the Panther's gun mantlet at close range, neither option being tactically desirable when facing a tank that could destroy them from 2,000 meters away. The first widespread combat test of HVAP ammunition came not in Normandy's claustrophobic hedgerows, but in the open country of Lorraine, where terrain favored German defensive tactics. September 1944 found Lieutenant General George Patton's Third Army deep in France, racing toward the German border with logistics stretched to breaking point. The 4th Armored Division, one of the most effective American armored formations, had advanced aggressively, seizing a bridgehead over the Moselle River near Arracourt. German High Command recognized the threat immediately. If Patton's armor reached the Rhine and crossed into Germany proper, the industrial heart of the Reich would be exposed to direct attack. General Hasso von Manterfell's 5th Panzer Army received orders to counterattack, destroy the American bridgehead, and push back Patton's advance before it became unstoppable. The German force assembled for this counterattack included 2 newly formed Panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th, equipped primarily with Panther tanks fresh from German factories. On paper, the German advantage appeared overwhelming. The 2 brigades together fielded approximately 150 tanks against Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, which possessed roughly 50 Sherman tanks. The 113th Panzer Brigade alone entered battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns in both battalions combined, including 42 Panthers and 40 Panzer IVs. German planners anticipated rapid victory. The Panthers' technical superiority should compensate for any American advantages in logistics or air support. This assumption proved fundamentally mistaken for reasons that transcended simple technical comparisons. The Battle of Arracourt, fought over 11 days from September 18th to 29th, would become the largest tank engagement fought by American forces until the Battle of the Bulge 3 months later. More importantly for the psychological narrative, it would demonstrate that American tank crews, properly trained and equipped with specialized ammunition, could defeat technically superior German armor through superior tactics, combined arms coordination, and judicious use of high-velocity armor-piercing ammunition that German intelligence had failed to anticipate. The morning of September 19th began with thick fog blanketing the rolling terrain around Arracourt. German reconnaissance was limited. The Panzer brigades, lacking proper scouting units, advanced blindly into terrain held by American forces who knew the ground and had established defensive positions overnight. At approximately 0800 hours, elements of the 113th Panzer Brigade penetrated American outposts east and south of Arracourt. The German tanks, factory new Panthers, with inexperienced crews who had received perhaps 6 weeks of training, moved forward in column formation. This tactical error, Born of inadequate training and overconfidence in technical superiority, veteran American tankers immediately exploited. Captain Kenneth R. Lamison's C Company, 37th Tank Battalion, held positions along key approaches to Arracourt. His Sherman crews had been briefed on the HVAP rounds in their ammunition racks, 6 rounds per tank. The briefing had emphasized careful employment. Use them wisely against Panther turrets or mantlets at ranges where velocity remained sufficient for penetration. Don't waste them on long-range shots where the tungsten core might shatter on impact. Wait for favorable angles and ranges under 800 meters. The fog that hindered German reconnaissance now worked decisively in favor of American defenders. A section of Lamison's Shermans occupied positions south of the village when the first Panther materialized from the mist, barely 75 meters away. At this range, the Panther's superior long-range gunnery advantage meant nothing. The German crew, surprised by sudden contact, hesitated for perhaps 2 seconds while processing the unexpected encounter. The American gunner, Corporal James Mitchell, fired instantly. The HVAP round, traveling at over 1,000 meters per second, struck the Panther's gun mantlet with devastating effect. The tungsten-carbide core punched through the curved cast steel that German engineers had confidently declared proof against American 76mm guns. The core continued through the mantlet, severing the gun breech and detonating the ammunition stored directly beneath. The Panther exploded. The turret lifted slightly from the hull as internal ammunition detonated in a chain reaction. Flames erupted from every opening. The 5-man crew had no chance to escape. 2 more Panthers emerged from the fog in quick succession, following their lead tank, in column formation, rather than deploying into tactical spacing. Both were destroyed within seconds by HVAP rounds from concealed American positions. The German crews, expecting to dominate engagement ranges, found themselves ambushed at point-blank distance by ammunition they didn't know existed. The remaining German tanks in the column, perhaps 4 Panthers, turned away in confusion. Crews who had been confidently advancing suddenly faced destroyed lead tanks and incoming fire from directions they couldn't identify in the fog. German doctrine emphasized maintaining frontal armor toward threats, but in zero visibility conditions, with American fire coming from multiple directions, crews couldn't determine where the front was. They withdrew, leaving burning Panthers behind. Throughout the morning of September 19th, similar engagements erupted across the Arracourt sector. American tanks, using fog as tactical concealment, engaged Panthers at ranges where HVAP rounds were most effective. The German tactical deployment proved consistently disastrous. Advancing in column without proper reconnaissance, Panther crews repeatedly exposed their thinner side armor, measured at just 45 millimeters, to American flanking fire. Near Arracourt's command post, a platoon of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, also equipped with 76mm guns and precious HVAP ammunition, engaged German armor at close range. The fast-moving tank destroyers, capable of 55 miles per hour on roads, proved devastatingly effective in the close-range fog-shrouded combat. Their mobility allowed them to engage, destroy, and relocate before German crews could effectively return fire. By noon, as fog lifted, American forward artillery observers could coordinate fire with defending tank companies. P-47, Thunderbolt fighter bombers of the 405th Fighter Group arrived overhead, diving through gaps in clouds to strike German armor with rockets and 500-pound bombs. The combination of American advantages became mathematically overwhelming, despite German technical superiority in individual tank versus tank comparisons. While the Panther possessed superior armor and firepower as an individual weapon system, American forces employed combined arms tactics as standard doctrine developed through years of training and refined through months of combat experience. German tanks advanced without adequate artillery support, without air cover to suppress American positions, without infantry to clear American defensive positions and identify threats. American forces coordinated armor with artillery, air power, infantry, and tank destroyers in an integrated system that overwhelmed German technical advantages through systematic application of combined firepower. When Panthers encountered these prepared defenses, they were destroyed piecemeal despite their superior individual capabilities. The HVAP ammunition did not make Sherman tanks equal to Panthers in percentile technical specifications. Warfare is not conducted according to technical specifications alone. Tanks are destroyed by crews who exploit vulnerabilities under actual combat conditions that bear little resemblance to proving ground tests. The Panther's gun mantlet, necessary to allow the 75mm gun to elevate and traverse, created a vulnerable point that German designers had accepted as an unavoidable engineering compromise. The junction between turret and hull, the side armor, the engine deck vulnerable to plunging fire, all represented targets that HVAP-equipped Shermans could now engage successfully at combat ranges that previously had been suicidal. More devastating to German morale than physical destruction was the psychological impact of discovering their armor was no longer invulnerable. Panther crews had been trained explicitly to believe their tanks could not be penetrated frontally by American fire. Intelligence briefings emphasized the Shermans' inadequate firepower. Training doctrine stated clearly that as long as crews kept the frontal armor toward the enemy, they remained safe from American tank guns. The first Panther commanders to watch American Sherman rounds punch through their mantlets and detonate ready ammunition learned otherwise. The psychological shock of seeing supposedly impervious armor defeated spread rapidly. Survivors of such encounters carried that knowledge back to their units, spreading awareness that American tanks now possessed ammunition capable of defeating Panthers frontally at combat ranges. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. By the afternoon of September 19th, German tank commanders were reporting to headquarters that American Shermans possessed new, more powerful ammunition. The reports arriving at 5th Panzer Army headquarters were confused and contradictory, revealing the chaos of tactical-level intelligence under combat conditions. Some crews claimed Americans had secretly deployed tank destroyers with 90mm guns. Others suggested British forces had provided 17-pounder Firefly tanks to American units, vehicles known to penetrate Panther armor. The truth that American industry had developed specialized ammunition that partially negated the Panther's armor advantage was more troubling to German planners than any of these theories. It meant that American industrial capacity could respond to tactical problems faster than German industry could counter them. More ominously, it suggested American metallurgical research had achieved breakthroughs in tungsten-carbide ammunition that German engineers, despite pioneering the technology, could not match due to material shortages. The fighting continued through September 22nd, when the major German offensive efforts finally stalled completely. American forces had destroyed or disabled approximately 86 German tanks and assault guns through a combination of tank fire, artillery, air attack, and close-range infantry anti-tank weapons. American losses stood at 25 Sherman tanks and 7 tank destroyers destroyed or damaged beyond field repair. The kill ratio heavily favored Americans despite their technical disadvantage in individual tank performance. This result validated American doctrine emphasizing combined arms coordination over individual weapons superiority. But for tank crews, the knowledge that HVAP ammunition gave them a fighting chance against Panthers transformed tactical psychology in ways difficult to quantify but clearly visible in after-action reports. The Battle of Arracourt represented not just a tactical victory but a psychological watershed in the European armoured campaign. American tank crews learned conclusively that they could defeat Panthers without waiting for specialised tank destroyers or overwhelming air support. With proper ammunition, favourable engagement conditions, and sound tactics, Sherman crews could fight Panthers with reasonable expectation of success. German crews experienced the opposite psychological journey. They lost the psychological security of believing in absolute frontal invulnerability. The armour that had protected them through months of combat could be defeated by American guns firing specialised ammunition. This knowledge fundamentally altered German tactical behaviour in subsequent engagements. The German perspective on Arracourt, reconstructed from unit war diaries, prisoner interrogations, and post-war accounts, reveals confusion and bitter recrimination. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which had entered battle with approximately 90 tanks and assault guns, could muster fewer than 20 operational vehicles by September 29th. Losses to all causes, combat damage, mechanical breakdown, and abandonment due to fuel shortages, had effectively destroyed the unit. German after-action reports struggled to explain the defeat in terms that preserved belief in German tactical and technical superiority. The technical superiority of the Panther remained undeniable on paper. How had inexperienced crews in newly produced tanks been defeated so comprehensively by American forces equipped with supposedly inferior Shermans? The answers lay partly in training and experience that German reports reluctantly acknowledged. The Panzer Brigade crews had minimal training, often arriving at the front with only weeks of instruction on their vehicles. American tank crews in the 4th Armoured Division were veterans who had fought across France, understood combined arms warfare intimately, and had learned to read terrain for tactical advantage through hard experience. But training alone did not fully explain Panther losses, particularly the frontal penetrations that should not have been possible with standard American ammunition according to German technical understanding. German intelligence officers examining destroyed Panthers found entry holes smaller than expected from 76mm rounds, suggesting subcaliber projectiles. Examination of unexploded rounds recovered near disabled tanks revealed the truth that American forces had deployed tungsten-carbide ammunition. This discovery carried profound strategic implications for German planners. Germany itself had developed similar ammunition, the Panzer Granit 40 series, which used tungsten cores to improve penetration against Soviet heavy armour. But German tungsten supplies were critically limited by late 1944. With production focused on machine tools needed for aircraft engine manufacturing rather than ammunition, German tank crews fought increasingly with standard ammunition while facing enemies who deployed specialized rounds. If Americans could field specialized tungsten-carbide ammunition in quantities sufficient to distribute to frontline tank units, it demonstrated industrial capacity and resource access that Germany simply could not match. Not only were American tanks more numerous and better supported logistically, they were now equipped with ammunition that partially negated Germany's carefully engineered technical advantages in armour protection. The impact of HVAP ammunition extended beyond immediate tactical results at Arracourt. As word spread through American armoured units during October 1944 that the new ammunition could defeat Panthers under favourable circumstances, tank crews became measurably more willing to engage German armour directly. The psychological paralysis that had affected some units during difficult Normandy fighting began to dissipate. Crews still respected the Panthers' capabilities, maintained healthy tactical caution, but no longer felt helpless against it. This shift in morale proved crucial for subsequent operations as American forces pursued retreating German armies toward the German border. A crew that believes it can fight will engage aggressively, seeking advantageous positions and taking calculated risks. A crew that believes it is outmatched will hesitate, ceding initiative to the enemy and creating tactical situations where technical superiority becomes decisive. HVAP ammunition, though in critically short supply throughout the war, provided American tankers with a weapon that allowed them to fight Panthers on more equal terms. Even crews that had never fired an HVAP round benefited psychologically from knowing the ammunition existed and might be available when most needed. This psychological benefit transcended the actual tactical value of limited ammunition stocks. Tank commanders were forced to make difficult prioritization decisions with limited HVAP supply throughout the fall and winter of 1944. Tank destroyers, whose mission focused specifically on anti-tank combat, received preferential allocation in most units. Sherman tanks, with their dual role of supporting infantry and engaging enemy armor, often received fewer rounds, despite encountering enemy tanks more frequently than specialized tank destroyers. This created operational tension between tactical needs and supply realities that unit commanders struggled to resolve satisfactorily. The allocation system, managed at multiple command levels from army down to battalion, resulted in inevitable inefficiencies. Some units received more HVAP than they could immediately use based on their tactical situation. Others exhausted their supply within days of heavy fighting and received no resupply despite urgent requests, as overstretched logistics networks prioritized fuel and standard ammunition. When German forces launched their surprise offensive in the Ardennes in December 1944, American tank units faced renewed intense pressure under conditions that favored defense. The Battle of the Bulge saw hundreds of Panthers and Tiger tanks deployed in winter, conditions that limited Allied air superiority due to poor weather and restricted mobility due to snow-covered roads. American Sherman crews relied heavily on their scarce HVAP ammunition to engage German heavy armor during the battle's critical first week. The shortage became critical within days. Some units exhausted their HVAP supply completely by December 20th and found resupply requests going unfulfilled as logistical networks struggled to deliver any ammunition through snow-blocked roads disrupted by German advances. Yet, even in the difficult fighting of the Ardennes, American forces demonstrated that tactical skill and combined arms coordination could compensate for technical disadvantage when ammunition scarcity prevented optimal engagement. Tank crews coordinated closely with infantry, using bazooka teams to disable Panthers from close range, while Shermans provided covering fire. Artillery forward observers called in time on target missions that damaged optics, disabled tracks, and killed exposed crew members, even when shells could not penetrate armor directly. Air support, when weather finally permitted operations in late December and January, proved devastatingly effective against German armor concentrated on approach roads without concealment. The Battle of the Bulge ended with German armored forces shattered, having lost hundreds of irreplaceable tanks and experienced crews in an offensive that failed to reach its strategic objectives. By early 1945, the strategic picture had shifted decisively and irreversibly in Allied favor. American and British forces were preparing to cross the Rhine in overwhelming strength. Soviet armies were advancing from the east, having shattered German defensive lines in massive winter offensives. Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing under combined strategic bombing, loss of territory containing critical resources and manufacturing facilities, and severe shortages of raw materials including fuel and tungsten. Panther production, which had reached 3,900 units in 1944, fell sharply in early 1945 as factories were bombed, transportation networks disrupted, and raw materials became unavailable. Even when Panthers were produced, fuel shortages often kept them immobile. German tank units in the final months frequently abandoned tanks not because of combat damage, but because they lacked fuel to operate them or recovery vehicles to tow them. The technical limitations of HVAP ammunition, while less publicized than its successes, deserve examination for historical completeness. The tungsten-carbide core, while excellent at penetrating armor when conditions were favorable, was inherently brittle. Below certain impact velocities, approximately 2,300 to 2,500 feet per second, the core could shatter on contact rather than penetrating. This meant that HVAP effectiveness declined significantly at longer ranges where velocity had decreased substantially. The effective range against Panther mantlets was approximately 1,000 meters. Beyond this distance, the probability of the core shattering on impact increased substantially, making long-range shots wasteful of scarce ammunition. American tankers learned these limitations through combat experience, sometimes tragically. Crews that fired HVAP at Panthers beyond effective range wasted scarce ammunition and often provoked return fire from German guns that remained effective at much longer ranges. Training on proper HVAP employment remained minimal throughout the war, as ammunition arrived at frontline units faster than training materials could be developed and distributed. Many crews learned effective employment techniques through trial and error under combat conditions. The post-war analysis of HVAP ammunition effectiveness revealed both successes and limitations with mathematical precision. Against the Panther's gun mantlet at ranges up to 1,000 meters, HVAP proved highly effective when hits were achieved, reliably penetrating and often causing catastrophic secondary explosions as penetrating rounds detonated stored ammunition. Against the glacis plate, results were poor except at very close ranges and favorable angles. The extreme slope meant that tungsten-carbide rounds traveling at high velocity often ricocheted or shattered on impact without achieving penetration. This meant Sherman crews still needed to maneuver for advantageous shot angles, flanking Panthers when tactically possible, exactly as they had before HVAP became available. The ammunition did not make Sherman tanks technical equals to Panthers in specifications that mattered on proving grounds. But it gave American crews a fighting chance in engagements where previously they had little hope of frontal penetration, and that psychological shift proved as important as the physical capability. The German perspective on American HVAP ammunition, gathered from post-war interrogations and examination of captured documents, revealed grudging professional respect mixed with deep frustration. German ordnance officers recognized that American industry had solved the tungsten core ammunition problem more successfully than German manufacturers, despite Germany having pioneered the underlying technology. While Germany had developed tungsten-carbide ammunition with the Panzer Granate 40 series, production limitations meant these rounds were never available in sufficient quantities to meaningfully affect tactical situations. American production of HVAP, though also limited by tungsten scarcity, still exceeded German capability substantially by late 1944. German tank crews interviewed after the war frequently mentioned American ammunition improvements as a significant factor that complicated their tactical situation. The knowledge that Sherman tanks could penetrate Panther mantlets at combat ranges meant German crews could not simply rely on frontal armor for protection. This forced more cautious tactics, slower advances, and greater reliance on defensive positions. But defensive warfare ceded initiative to American forces, allowing them to employ combined arms tactics that negated German advantages in individual tank capabilities. The psychological impact of losing armor invulnerability contributed to the increasingly defensive mindset that characterized German armored operations in 1945. September 19, 1944, when American Sherman crews first engaged Panthers with HVAP ammunition at Arracourt, marked a genuine turning point in the psychological balance of armored warfare in Europe. German crews who had fought confidently behind their armor learned that American tanks could pose a serious frontal threat with specialized ammunition. American crews who had felt outmatched gained meaningful confidence from knowing they possessed ammunition that could defeat Panthers under favorable circumstances. This shift in tactical psychology, enabled by tungsten-carbide ammunition produced in American factories and distributed in quantities that, while never adequate, exceeded German capability, influenced every subsequent armoured engagement of the European war. HVAP ammunition, though never available in desired quantities, provided enough improved capability to transform American tank crews from uncertain defenders into confident attackers willing to engage German armour directly. The crews who fired those first HVAP rounds in combat, watching tungsten cores punch through armour that had seemed invincible, demonstrated that industrial capacity and material science applied intelligently to urgent tactical problems could overcome seemingly insurmountable technical disadvantages. This fundamental lesson, learned at considerable cost on battlefields across Europe, remains directly relevant for military planners facing technological challenges today. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.